Mark chapter 3, we're starting tonight in verse 1. We're going to call the lesson tonight Critics and Followers. And how many of us know there's a lot of critics out there in all kinds of different ways? And obviously there's a lot of followers as well. And so we're going to look at how this is shaping up tonight as we look at the first, Lord willing, we're going to try to look at the first 12 verses, but we'll see. So we begin this verse tonight as we start in verse 1. And immediately we find Jesus confronted with both an issue and critics right from the very, very start. It says that in verse 1, it says, Jesus entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a shriveled hand. Now, that's not something we think about probably too much, but there's a deformity of some type. Something's wrong. He can't use this hand. And so that's the issue. He's entered the synagogue, and there was a man there with this. So that's the issue that he's going to address. And then it says in verse 2, and I find this is really, as I was reading through this and studying it, really, really just spoke in a couple of different ways. So look at how it begins. It says, in order to accuse him. Now, right from the get-go here, we see there's intent, there's motive, there's a desire to scheme. I mean, we could just go on. And then it says they were watching him closely. Now, we talked about that last week, how they must have a lot of time, because all they're doing is watching every move that Jesus makes, right? So they're watching him closely about how they always followed him everywhere he goes. Peter, if we think about this, Peter describes the devil, he describes the enemy as what? A roaring lion seeking who he may devour. In other words, they're just always walking around. They're always looking, where's the next prey? Where's the next victim? Well, of course, that's nature, and that's how it works for their food chain. But here we see the enemy very comparative to that. So they're always looking, how can we get him? Because this really, really speaks about their hard heart. The fact that they're stalking Jesus, really to a degree, they're watching him in order, it says here, in order to accuse him. So they really did see him as a threat. I mean, they wanted him gone at all costs. They had no mind about whether it was right or wrong or true. They wanted to get him. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute, why that's important and how that compares to today. And so it says, in order to accuse him, they were watching him closely to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath. All right, now, okay, so we go back here. Wait a minute. As he entered the synagogue, there's a man there with a shriveled hand. And in order to accuse him, they were watching to see if he would heal him. So here's the question. Did they plant him there? Did they put him there? Was this a setup? I think that's a valid question. Was this a trap that they orchestrated? Because, see, they knew the heart of Christ, and it was compassion. Here was someone in need. It was going to be met, and they knew that. Did they set him up? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't tell us that, but I think it's a valid question to think about because it all just kind of goes together. Hey, there's that guy in the corner. Let's they're not above using people. Don't get me wrong, and neither is the enemy. He'll put things in our pathway all the time to try to draw us in. And so we see here this continues, and Jesus told the man, it says in verse 3, with the shriveled hand, stand before us. All right. He was not going to hide anything. It was going to be done. It was going to be taken care of. He said, stand before us. He knew what they were up to. Why? Because as we've seen in the prior chapters, he could hear their heart. He knew. Even when they weren't speaking words, he knew what they were thinking. Because he told them, why are you thinking that? So we see this, and that tells you also when we think about the enemy sometimes, yes, he's sly and cunning and all those other things, but he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. Okay? Because again, he's dealing with God, but yes, so he's still trying to do things that are just kind of underhanded, thinking, oh, I won't get caught. Yeah, you will. Every time, because he knows your heart. And so he tells, stand before us. He knew what they were up to, and he asked them, and this is where it gets heated to the first part of this. He said to them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? Wow, that's a heavy question, right? He said, is it lawful to save a life or to kill? But they were silent. Wow. Now that really says something, right? That really speaks about their condition, because he asked them, he said, is it lawful to do good I mean, what are we able to do here? I mean, are we going to do good or are we going to do evil? Are we going to help somebody? Are we going to save a life? Or are we going to kill somebody? Which way are we going here? I mean, what? And it says they didn't answer. But the ball now is squarely in their court. Okay, now that's on you. You've been asked a direct question and they didn't have an answer. So they didn't say anything. But what does that say to us? That tells to us they were so determined to be right in their methodology and what they were doing. They were so determined and they hated him so bad, they would forego, listen to this now, think about this, they would forego a good deed for someone in need and use this act of healing against Jesus to proclaim him as a blasphemer. This person's life was going to be changed and they were willing to use that for wrong. What does that say about their heart? And that kind of leads us to our first question. You know, what was Jesus, what was the spiritual condition that he could see in the hearts of those seeking to bring him down? Because we see in verse 5, it says, after looking around at them with anger, he was grieved at the hardness of their hearts. And he told the man, stretch out your hand. Stretch out your hand. So he stretched it out and his hand was restored. This spiritual condition, he's looking at them, and read that. He says he looked at them with anger. He looked at them and it grieved him at where they were at. It grieved him at the hardness of their heart, that righteous anger that he had. In other words, he's looking at them, how dare you? I mean, here you are. They're in the synagogue. You know, you're in the house. I mean, you're here, and you're here as a quote-unquote supposed representative of God. And that's where your heart is at. That this person has a need, and you don't really care. You just want to use that to get me. I mean, it says here he was righteously angry. I mean, he was upset at that because it was just so rotten. I mean, because of the representation. Here you are. You're the Pharisees. I mean, you're the ones that know the book back and forth and up one side and down the other. And this is what you're taking from it? You're not displaying God at all. And I've mentioned this many times, but if you study further in the book of John, he flat out tells them the reason you're acting like you are is because you don't know God. Now, people don't want to hear that. You know, and I love what you said, brother. There's a lot of people that say, oh, I'm this or I'm that, but they really aren't. You know, it's one thing to have a title, it's another thing to live it. You know, a lot of people's got titles. You know, a lot of people carry titles. They don't really have any depth. You know, if it's not who you are, if there's not been a change of heart. You know, and I've said this many times the night that I got saved, I remember the guy, and I've used this, and it wasn't new, and he didn't coin it, but I've heard it before, but it just impactful on that night. He said there's 18 inches from heaven to hell, from here to here. You know, because if it don't change, if it don't move from just here to here, it's got to move to here. And here we see it had not done that. They had all the knowledge, but as we've said before, it tells us in the Proverbs that knowledge is only the beginning of wisdom. So if you don't use it, it never evolves into wisdom. It never really becomes that. And so here they're willing to do that. And Jesus, it tells us, was grieved at the hardness of their heart. So what he could see is, you're lost. You're spiritually selfish. You're religious. You have no relationship. You don't know me. You're the one that in that day says, Lord, Lord, look at everything that I've done. He says, but I don't know you. That's what he's seeing here. He's saying, you know, you're so bound by my way or no way. You're the protector of the law, but not God's law. In other words, you're all wound up about what you created, and nobody's doing it your way. But we've not gotten back to what God said. In other words, they've lost the sight of all the things that are good. And it tells us that when Jesus asked them, is it lawful? What he was saying is, I'm asking you. He was subjecting himself to their authority. He said, you're the ones in charge here. You're in the synagogue. You're the ones that people come to for all these different things. So I'm asking you, as spiritual authorities, I'm asking you, is it okay? Is it okay that we do good today or that we do evil? Is it okay that we save a life today or that we kill somebody? Which one is it? That's pretty serious. But it also tells us that they stood silent. They didn't answer. So they refused to answer, and it wasn't because they didn't know. They didn't want to find any agreement with Jesus. They did not want to be on his side no matter what egg was on their face. They didn't care. And that's but what does that clearly give us a definition of? Pride, right? And pride goes before destruction. And ultimately they would be. I mean, their whole thing would be just completely upended before. But pride, it not only leads to destruction, but it also hinders logic and reason. In other words, it keeps us blind. Because if you've ever known anybody, and most of us have, that in their life they kind of portray that it's my way or no way. I'm going to be right no matter what, and I'm not listening to nobody else because I'm right. Even though they know most of the time they're not. But that arrogance and that pride won't let them see past that, because there's no way that I'm going to let you have one up on me by telling me that I'm wrong. And it's just it begins to build a pattern to where ultimately it does create the fall. And if we go back and study the creation, if you will, or the evolvement, if we want to use that word, of Lucifer into Satan, that's where it was. It began with that seed of pride. Well, I want to be this or I want to be that, and then I want to be God. No, I want to be bigger than God. I'll put my throne above his throne. And it began to just creep on, and it got worse and worse and worse until now we have the enemy of all enemies that is such a sore loser. Says, I want to take as many people with me as I possibly can. And again, it became such a bitterness and a hard heart, I couldn't see anything else. And we see that multiple times throughout Scripture. Pharaoh was never going to give up. No, it's my way or no, I'm going to go. And ultimately, it would cost him everything. I mean, he sat there and watched his whole army get drowned in the ocean. I mean, but he went on, but he was still, not a good person. And we see all these different things. So here, though, while that's the corrupt leaders of the world and this and that, Jesus is looking at them and tells us with anger and grief in his heart, because he's saying to them, you should know better. You're standing in the temple. You're standing in the synagogue. You're the one teaching the Torah, the law, and all that. And this is who you are. Shame on you. I mean, that's really what he's trying to teach here. And so the importance of not only being able to discern and decipher and understand Scripture, but to even to some degree, even greater, to understand God's message to the heart of the one he's trying to reach, to every believer, to every person that wants to come to him. He's wanting to say, I love you, and I want to be there for you. I want to take care of you. I want to meet your need, whether it's a shriveled hand or a puckered puss. I want to make you smile. I want to change your life if you'll let me. But if you've got those that are supposed to be sharing this and they're not doing that, he said, what are you doing? And he's really calling them out on this. And it's a powerful picture. And so Jesus told the man, stretch out your hand. And he did, and we're told that he was healed. It was fixed. And if we think about the simplicity of that, okay, stretch out your hand, and it says it was restored. Jesus only asked for faith and obedience. And that's what happened. And there it was taken care of. Now, does that mean that everything's going to happen the way we want it to? No. Does that mean that every little hiccup and every issue is going to be healed the way that we think so? No. Because his plan is just different. He knows the better plan because he sees the big picture. A lot of times we only see the immediate. We see like the right now. We're the Band-Aid. We want to patch the hole right now. But he sees the need for something better because he wants to heal the wound. He wants to. He was touched and his hand was restored. And then we look at verse 6 and it says, immediately. So right then, at once, they were not excited over the fact that this man was healed, but it says immediately the Pharisees went out and started plotting with the Herodians against him, how they might kill him. Now, again, we've moved the needle. Now this is no longer, oh, he's a bad guy, a false teacher, blah, blah, blah. He needs to go. No, we need to really get rid of him. Can we see the device of the heart here? This is no longer just a plot to run somebody out of town. We're talking about murder. We're talking about taking someone's life because you disagree with them. That's pretty important to understand how that continued staying in that rotten state of mind and heart continues to build. Okay? When in a criminal charge, all the years that I worked on the road, you would hear in the court charges, especially if someone had been, tried to kill somebody or had killed somebody, they would read the charge and be charged with so many certain degree murder or this or that, and they would say, and it was done with malice and a forethought. In other words, you thought about it before you did it, and you thought about it long enough to plan it, and then you acted on it. What are they doing? Plotting. Hey, man, let's talk about how we can get rid of this Jesus guy, But here's the other side of it. These two groups, they didn't like each other. The Herodians and the Pharisees were enemies. They hated each other. They didn't work together. They didn't like each other at all. But they put all that aside because of their combined despisement of Jesus. That's important. What caused them to become fault finders instead of truth seekers? Because look at verse 6. Again, plotting. Plotting can move in all kinds of different directions, but ultimately it includes lies, which they had no problem with, because they would pay people at the trial of Jesus to lie and say, oh, he's a bad guy, or he did this, or he did. They had no problem with that. They would pay for false witnesses. Okay, they would pay for that. They would have that done. But in Proverbs chapter 6, in the things that God hates, he hates the lying tongue. But they paid for that. The spiritual leaders, Jesus looked upon them with anger and a grieved heart. Okay, it says they were plotting. So that's lies and schemes. The lowering of our judgment and morals. But they're doing it with their sworn enemy, the Herodians. We've heard old phrases like dancing with the devil. Are you doing the devil's work? These two groups did not like each other. In other words, they would rather join with their opposition than admit they were wrong. What does that give birth to? Modern day politics. Think about it. Think about it. A lot of times, friends, and I'm not saying every time, but a lot of times what we see, the picture that we see, the facade, it's just that. It's behind the camera, it's a whole different story. I mean, all my days in the wrestling world, we're bad guys on TV, and we hate each other. I'm going to kick your butt, and we're going to do this, and we go backstage and laugh like everybody believed that. I mean, that was our job. That's what you're supposed to do, right? And here, these two groups, they're saying, you know what? Let's put on a show. I mean, they didn't say that. They still continued. They didn't go back. They didn't become buddies or anything. This was all for. They wanted to join together for something awful. They were determined to be seen as right no matter what. And because we read here that Jesus healed this person, and immediately we got to kill that guy. What? I mean, that's where your heart is at. And so they saw his influence. They saw people, his crowds were gathering, and they saw the people listening, and they saw lives being changed, and they saw his power. They saw his boldness to speak into lives. And to them, this was a threat to their power. This was a threat to their position, so he had to go. That sounds a little familiar and modern, doesn't it? That's kind of how it works. If anyone, doesn't matter, I haven't put any names on any one particular person or anything, but if someone rises up and kind of has a popularity and everybody's like, yeah, oh boy, we can't have that. Well, here it was. Here's where it came from. We go back again right from Scripture. In the beginning, it all started here. I mean, all the stories and all the things that we see now, as we famously say in our Sunday morning class, nothing's changed. It's just a recycling of the same old patterns over and over and over, because that is the problem with the human heart that is not transformed by the loving grace of God. I mean, that's it, because it even tells us that in Scripture, that within the heart dwells evil. Well, when something dwells somewhere, what does that mean? It means it lives there, right? And if it lives there long enough, what eventually happens? You'll find out that it's there, You might not see the bear in the cave that lives in there, but go in there and you'll find out. You know, it's there, right? And so we see, again, things come out. And so they were plotting. And when one is plotting, they enter a different mindset. They enter that, again, I got to have it my way. I'm going to get it my way, and I'll do whatever it takes to get it. Have you ever heard somebody say that? I'd do anything to have that. Now, some people say that comically or maybe flippantly and just thinking, oh, I'd do anything to have that. But think about how big that statement is. I heard a guy from Hollywood not that long ago, and he said that they have teams of people, and this was very disturbing actually, that they pay X amount of dollars or whatever to just walk up and down the streets in different places in the Hollywood place to listen to hear somebody say that. I'd do anything, have fame, or I'd do anything and they would stop and say, do you really mean that? And that's how a lot of people end up in some pretty bad stuff, And I don't want to get into the details of that, but again, I can make that for this. I could do something, never thinking of the consequences of what that means later on, And it's like, that's the enemy. I'd do anything. Well, here they would do anything to get rid of Jesus, even plotting with their enemies, and it's unbelievable. So while they were there plotting, they were growing deeper in their hatred of Jesus. But we see that on the next set of verses that the opposite was happening with Jesus. He's growing in popularity with the people. And we begin in verse 7. It says, Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a large crowd followed from Galilee. And a large crowd followed from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and I probably said that wrong, but that's close, and beyond the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. The large crowd came to him because they heard about everything he was doing. Now that's important. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And then he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him so the crowd wouldn't crush him. In other words, make sure I got a way out of here because I've got a lot to do. I can't just stay in this one place. Since he had healed many, all who had diseases were pressing toward him to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirit saw him, and we talked about this in chapter 1, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." Now think about this for a minute. The Pharisees, who were the spiritual people and advisors or whatever of their time, refused to recognize Jesus. They want to kill Jesus, yet the demons fall at his feet and say, "You are the Son of God." Man, that's, we go back to chapter 1, the demon that was in the church, he'd been pretty comfortable there for a while until Jesus walked in the door. That's important that we keep Jesus in the church, right? I mean, he should be here. A lot of places you think, I'm not sure if he's there or not. When he's there, the demons stay outside. They can fly around the building and get mad all they want, but they can't come in, and they know that. And so here we see that the demons, and I love that. That's actually just really hitting me as I'm reading back through this. That when they saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." Man, and he would strongly warn them not to make him known. So here we see the miracles as the crowds are following. They saw the miracles and they heard the words and they followed him as they traveled. But were they following him? Think about how that's written. Because he says they saw the miracles and they saw this and they were going along, but were they actually following him, or they were looking to see what was going to be next? Because there is a big difference. There's a big, big difference. In other words, was it real? Was it real? Or was it just like my brother said a while ago, but well, yeah, I'm a Protestant, or I'm a Catholic, or I'm a this or that, but okay, I didn't ask you your title. Do you know Jesus? And even more importantly, does he know you? Because that's where it all comes together. Was it real devotion, or was it just curiosity? Because you see that curiosity, it opens doors to points of interest and this and that, but at the end of the day, it doesn't lead us to him unless we really are desiring to find him, right? We got to pursue him and follow him. It says, "Ask and you will be answered, and knock and you'll open the door," and all these other things. This is so important. So what causes us sometimes to waver between faith and doubt? Okay, because we see here there are some that, wow, look at that. They want to know more. And there's those like, yeah, man, that's some cool tricks. I want to see some of those. I want to see some more of those. And, I want to see some more, fish and loaves. I want to see, they want to see all the stuff, but they don't really want to know him. It's kind of like, I want to get healed, but I don't want to stop what made me sick. I had a friend of mine, they were praying over people one night. And again, I don't speak cruel of anyone. I try not to. But a guy came down. He's got an oxygen tank. He's got a mask on, and he's coughing and all this stuff. And he's got emphysema and lung cancer, and Lord knows everything in the world you can have wrong with you. And he says, man, I just need a prayer for healing. And he said, well, I want to pray with you. But he said, as you're kneeling before me over this altar to pray, and he said, I want to pray with you. He said, but we probably also need to talk about that pack of Camels in your pocket. And the guy's like, well, I don't want to stop that. I just want to get better. Well, that's kind of the problem, right? When we got things in our life that aren't good, and it could be whatever. It doesn't have to be it could be anything. It could be a bad attitude. It could be anything. But no, I just want the things that he offers, but I don't want him. And that was part of the problem with all those that were following. They were following, literally walking, but they weren't following him. They were just in his area. And there's a big, big difference. But what causes us sometimes to doubt between faith, waver between faith and doubt? I believe that it's the level of our relationship strength. In other words, is he Lord of all? Because see, that's important. Now, Adrian Rogers said many years ago, he's either Lord of all or he's not Lord at all. And that's still very, very true. Because again, if we've given him and surrendered our lives and hearts to him, there has to be a change. But letting go is hard, isn't it? We all struggle with that, right? Because we all like ownership, and we don't want to let go. Whether it's a physical, tangible thing that we can hold on to that's got some sentimental value or something like that. Well, I got that back from, grandma. Okay, that's fine. That's great, but it may be old and tattered, and maybe you just need to put it up. You don't have to throw it away, but maybe you just need to put it somewhere, But then there's other things that we hold on to that we don't need, that aren't good for us. Bitterness and hard-heartedness and unforgiveness and all these other things that sometimes we hold on to because in their own strange way, they bring us a comfort because I own that. I'm mad at you and I'm glad. Boy, that makes me feel good. Every time you walk in the door, I can just get worked up. I mean, it seems weird, but we become comfortable in those painful things sometimes. And sometimes, just like you've heard me say before, we get comfortable on our pity pot sometimes. And we get comfortable in our pain sometimes because we've become so accustomed to having it, we can't imagine it not being there. It's like a traumatic event. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but is it helping you to continue to remember it? You can't drag it around with you all the time. It's got to go. There's a point in time it needs to stay where it was. It happened and it was awful, and we just hope and pray that we've gotten past it and we moved on, but we can never move on from it if we've always got it in our pocket. I remember this. I remember this person. I remember it like it was yesterday. I had been in town for probably about a week, and we were living in the parsonage at the time. And this person knocked on the door, and they introduced themselves to me. And I said, "Okay." And they said, "Well, we understand you're the new pastor." I said, "Yep." And they said, "Well," and they said, "Well, I got something I want to give you." And I kid you not, it was probably about this high, and it was just stacks and stacks and stacks of depositions and law papers and all kinds of stuff. And I'd seen all those things from my days on the road, but I'm like, what do you want me to do with that? I mean, I don't even know you. What is this? And this was a situation that happened to me. Now, this was in 2007 when this incident happened to me. But it happened to this person in 1983. So it had been a while, okay? And they were like, well, all these people in this community did me wrong, and the former pastor of this church was involved in this, and I want you to do something about it. I'm like, okay. I mean, I just got in town. I mean, I didn't even unpack my bags. I mean, what do you want me to do? As the time would go by, and again, not making light of a person's terrible situation, the bitterness is what drove them. They couldn't let it go. And as the years would go by that I would be in that ministry, that every time I saw this person, that's all they wanted to talk about. They would not let it go. I mean, and they were so hard-hearted about this. They literally said, I'll never forget this, that the only way the only way they would ever come to peace with what had happened to them was that all the people that were involved would be brought to the parking lot of the church and be hung from the gallows. I'm like, you need to get saved. I said, I'm sorry. I don't even know where to put it. But if you are that hard-hearted and that mad, I get justice and, you did me wrong. I get all that. But you're killing yourself and you're killing your testimony and you're not doing yourself. You got to let that stuff go. That was 40 years ago, man. I mean, I know it was bad, but come on. Because bitterness is like poison, It only takes a little bit to kill you. It may take years for it to happen, but it eventually will. I worked a case like that one time, and the lady kept slipping a little strychnine in the coffee. It took a little while, but she finally got him. But a little arsenic or whatever it was, it's kind of bad. But seriously, we got to think about that. So sometimes we hold on to stuff that is not good for us, and letting go is hard. But if we fully trust him, he'll never let us down. And we got to believe that. The old saying again, get back to old sayings, whatever, let go and let God, that's just true. Sometimes we just have to do that. And that's hard to do sometimes because we like holding on to stuff, and we just, because it brings a sense of security. This is mine. I got it. Okay, but what if what you've got is harming you? What if what you got is not good? You're holding on to a rattlesnake. I got him, okay? He's got you too. We got to think about what are we holding on to? And it tells us as this passage ends, or this section ends in verse 12, that he gave warning to not make him known. Why? There's a reason, okay? Because many truly didn't know him. And he didn't want them going and talking about something they didn't know what they were talking about. Does that make sense? Think about it. If you really don't know whether it's the subject matter or the person that you're talking about or the situation you're talking about, you really aren't a good person to give the information about that, right? I mean, I couldn't stand here and give you a dissertation on, what is X times Y, because I don't know. That's not my expertise. We can talk about this. And that's what we're saying. Many people don't know him, therefore would not rightly explain him, which in turn would cause issues and confusion, but God is not the author of confusion, and he doesn't want that. So again, many today, that are making videos, or maybe they're even, and I don't want to call out any pastor, but maybe they're saying stuff, and it's causing more harm than good. And people are like, what's going on? You got to really know him to be able to talk about him. So he's saying, don't go talk about me. And he wasn't being hateful. He wasn't being cruel. He's make sure you know me first. And that makes a whole lot of sense when we begin to process what he's trying to say here. And also, it wasn't his time. He had more to do. He was already getting a lot of attention, and it was already kind of slowing down the process a little bit about where he needed to go. And so he didn't need any more roadblocks. He was already being watched all the time. He was already in a very, very watchful eye. He just wanted to go forth and be about the Father's work. And so there was two different things in that statement of just make sure you know me before you talk about me. And if you don't, just be quiet. And it wasn't being rude. That wasn't being ugly. That was just like, this is how we've got to operate. And so we see so much. And I think this is important as we read just this one section from chapter 3. There is so much here that sounds modern. It sounds modern when it comes to the hearts and the schemes and the things that goes on, which shows it's the heart that must change. The heart is what has to change in order to create true change. We see the hearts of the Pharisees had not changed. They were angry, they were bitter, they wanted it their way. And then we see also the crowds that are following. Their hearts to some degree had not changed because they just wanted the stuff, but they didn't want the one providing it, and that's where we get back down. And that's what the culmination, if you will, of these first 12 verses of chapter 3 is. It comes down to this one point. The heart has to change in order to find true change. That's really what it comes down to, if we want to say that's the bottom line, because that's really where it's at. So we'll stop there tonight. We'll pick up verse 13 next week. Thank you for being here. There's some interesting stuff in these first parts. It gives us a lot of things to think about. So thank you again for being here. Let's